Welcome to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, a podcast that brings personal stories from transplant survivors, their families, friends, and loved ones. This is where you will hear challenges and triumphs of everyone involved in this journey. Our guests will offer wisdom, advice, and inspiration on everything you want to know about transplant. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am a transplant survivor, and this is a podcast I wish I had before and immediately following my transplant. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. This is Jenny McFarland, your host, and let me tell you, it has been crazy busy over here on my side of the world. One piece of advice to give you, if you don't have to move, don't, because moving is so stressful. I think I mentioned last time that my husband and I just moved to El Paso, and it's just been a whirlwind of events. So it's been a struggle. And finally, we're settled into our house. We're about halfway done unpacking boxes, and we're just making our way. And then now that the holidays are coming up, life is busy. And I'm not complaining. I love being busy. I love having things to do and the energy to do it. I'm just saying it's a little stressful. But again, not complaining. So speaking of the holidays, if you are listening to this in real time, Christmas is just around the corner. I'm excited for Christmas. I know I've mentioned in the past all the Christmas things that I do, and because of moving, I haven't been able to do them this year, but I did manage to get up my Christmas tree. That was the first thing I did when I moved into my house. And so I'm just taking it easy this year for Christmas, which is okay. I'm just thankful to have another Christmas that I get to celebrate. So real quick, I want to remind you about our buddy program for the Pre to Post Transplant Foundation. If you are a member of the organ donation community and you want to be a mentor or you want a mentor, then sign up on our buddy program at www.pretopost.org, and we'll match you up with somebody who is similar to what you're going through. The foundation has big news coming up. We are going to have a big fundraiser in Houston for the organ donation community. It's called the Pre to Post Community Connect Day, and we're taking a day and having it packed, filled with content and information for people, as well as games and food and just overall connecting with other members in your community. So I'm excited for that. Keep an eye out on the website for that. And it's in Houston, but we're welcoming everybody in the country. So if you're not in Houston, you can still come. And also, we are starting up some new programs for the foundation that I will talk about next time. So with that, I'm just going to jump right into this episode with Todd. This is a great episode. He experienced a lot. He went through a lot. And he has an amazing story. So I can't wait for you to hear it. And again, I just want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. So with that, take a listen to this episode with Todd Nelson. Hi, Todd. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jenny. I'm really excited to be here. I love your podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm excited that you're here too. So let me ask you when you had your transplant, where you had your transplant, and why you needed one.
I had my first transplant on March 24th of 2000. Would it be 16 now? Yeah, 2016. And then I got my second transplant exactly 3 years later, March 24th, 2021. Also, maybe my transplant was the 18, 19, 20. It was actually my transplant was 2018. My second transplant was 2021, on the exact same day, March 24th. I actually have a tattoo of a shark that my daughter and I both got together with a transplant date on it.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's how weird is that? That's
It's,
awesome.
I
The
mean, just
same
getting a
day.
transplant is miraculous,
Yeah.
but to get one on the same day is infinitesimal.
Yeah. Yeah. And so something new that I'm doing, somebody had messaged me and asked me to ask my guests if they would be willing to share the age that they had their transplants. So if you're comfortable sharing your age of your
Yeah.
transplants, that would be awesome. If not, it's okay.
So I'm 58 now. I was 57 when I had my second transplant, and
Okay.
54 when I had my first transplant.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
So what did you have transplanted?
Double lung transplant both times.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where did you have it?
Stanford University or
Ah,
Stanford Hospital at the
okay.
University of Stanford.
All right.
I
I think I
think
have
the first lung transplant was actually at Stanford.
really.
Yeah.
You know, I think I've heard that too from somebody. I can't remember who, but yeah, I've heard that too. That's pretty cool. It's
They
pretty
have a
cool to be at that
remarkable
good.
team. They have a
Yeah.
really remarkable team there, and I've always felt really safe in their hands.
Yeah. Awesome. So you needed a double lung transplant. Why'd you need one?
You know, I had interstitial lung disease. It was called oh shit, I always forget. It's like my disease and I forget it. It's pneumonitis, and
Pneumonitis. That's a new one. I haven't heard that one yet.
yeah, hypersensitivity pneumonitis or pneumonitis. I forget which.
Okay.
I think I blocked it out. Right around my 50th birthday, I started coughing a lot and having breathing problems, and I went to the doctor and they measured my lung function, and I was only using 50% of my lungs. They started testing me. I got on the lung transplant list at 53, started using oxygen pretty extensively. Um, and then while I was on oxygen and on the list, I fell and broke several ribs in my back, and it also collapsed my lungs. So I was
Oh
hospitalized for
wow.
that. And about
Yeah.
a month later, I received my first set of lungs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So was the fall like, did that contribute to more of a decline in your lung function or was it just,
Yeah.
yeah,
The fall contributed to me being in the hospital. The collapsed lung didn't help. The pain, um, and you can't be in the hospital for long without sort of going downhill.
right.
So luckily, I didn't go downhill so far that I was no longer eligible for a transplant.
Okay.
Uh,
And let me go back. I already forgot I have transplant brain. So
yeah.
you were
Okay.
already on the list whenever you fell or,
Yes, I was already on the
okay.
list.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was already on the list. I was using massive amounts of oxygen. I forget how much, and I had taken a leave of absence for my job when I started going on the list.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
So whenever you found out about all this, like how fast did the process go? Like you started your coughing and stuff like that. Then when did you find out that, hey, you're going to need another transplant or you're going to need a transplant?
Yeah, it was pretty quick. I started coughing. It was 50. By 54, I was in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
It stayed pretty steady for 4 years, and then I quickly needed oxygen. I quickly, had to leave my work. And then when I finally made it to the hospital, I knew the week that I got my transplant, if I didn't have a transplant that week, I wouldn't survive the week.
Yeah.
I was really in bad shape.
It seems like that happens a lot with lungs. Like you do
Yeah,
okay. And then all of a sudden you just start
yeah,
to decline fast. Like I think that
yeah,
happens with so many people.
yeah.
Like the
One of my
lungs are
doctors,
just like, I'm going to hold out as long as I can. But once I'm
yeah,
done, that's it.
yeah. Yeah, that's one of my doctors have said. You'll go along and stay steady, and you can just do a precipitous decline. You don't know when it's going to come or what's going to cause it.
Yeah,
So hopefully you're healthy enough to when that happens that you're able to get a transplant.
for sure. Yeah. So, how did you feel whenever you learned that you're going to need a transplant? Like, did you even know about lung transplants at
When
that
I
point?
when I first was given the diagnosis, I of course Googled it, and it's like, transplant within, and it just, I was like, I didn't smoke, I didn't work in a mine. There's nothing in my life that points to lung disease. And to even imagine going through a lung transplant process, I couldn't, I had no idea.
Yeah.
But by the time I was sick, I knew I desperately needed one.
Hmm.
I was afraid of it. You can't know it's going to be like. You can't know what the recovery is going to be like, no matter what they tell you.
Right.
I think everyone has their own unique individual journey pre and post transplant.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been saying for a while, every transplant person has
Yeah.
the same story, but they tell a different side of the story. Like it's the
That,
same thing, but everybody has their own version of their
yeah.
own story.
That's a
So,
beautiful way of putting it. That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah. So, okay. So you're ready to go on the list. You're in the hospital, like so sick. Um, what's going on during that week that you're in the hospital waiting for that transplant, waiting for that call?
I was desatting it with any little movement. I could barely get up and go to the restroom. I would desat heavily. Then I'd cough for like an hour, and every day was worse than the day before. And then one day, my doctor walked in, and he's like, how do you feel about high risk lungs? And I was like, I'll take anything. And he says, I think we have someone for you. My wife was there a lot, but she was actually home. I live about 4.5 hours from the hospital, so I called her, and she and my daughter came rushing up. I found out I was eligible for. Or they found a donor Friday morning, and Friday night I went into the hospital and woke up the next morning with new lungs.
Yeah. So how'd that feel to finally like realize, oh, I'm getting my transplant?
It was scary and hopeful, like the
Yeah.
scariest thing I've ever thought about.
Yeah.
And then also hopeful because, like I said, I knew I was going to die that week if I didn't get the lungs. I was not a functioning person at that point. Going under is scary. Waking up is scary because you have a tube in your throat and all these people around you and all these machines. But the second they pulled that tube out, I breathed air with my own lungs, or I guess with my transplanted lungs. It was the first time I could take a breath without oxygen in months, almost a year.
Yeah.
So it was an extraordinary experience.
Yeah.
But as the recovery can be pretty brutal,
Yeah.
and you have to be pretty strong and pretty dedicated to not only do the regimen of the drugs, the regimen of walking and getting healthier and working out and just trying to make yourself better with each step.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say like you're going through a transplant and people think like normal people think um you wake up from your transplant and you're just better. But I think that
Yeah.
recovering from a transplant is almost just as hard as before your transplant because
Yes.
it's a different kind of hard, but
Yeah.
it's definitely it's hard work to
It really is.
recover and to stay recovered,
Yeah.
but it's just a little bit easier because it's worth it. There's something good that's coming out of it.
Mhm.
And so it's
And you can breathe.
yeah, and
you
you can
know,
yeah,
they say, and I'm sure you've heard this, that when you get a lung transplant, you're trading one disease for another. You
yeah,
had lung disease, and now you have a new disease, is that you have transplanted lungs, and your body is and the environment is doing everything they can to kill them.
yeah,
So you have to take care of them, your fresh lungs. You have to be really strict about the drug regimen, and the drugs are gnarly. There's a lot of side effects
yeah,
that come from the intensity of the drugs and having no immune system and how careful you have to be without an immune system and things like that.
mhm,
So it's definitely not like you're back the next day, a healthy person. You have a lot of work ahead of you, but
yeah,
it's worth it.
definitely worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one disease for another disease, but the other disease is just for
Yeah.
me, it's just minor stuff. So
Yeah.
I guess I don't really see it as another disease. I just see it as a different lifestyle
Yeah.
change.
Definitely.
And of
Definitely.
course, I haven't had like major problems that some people get, with, the side effects of the medications, like with
Yeah.
cancer and stuff like that. I haven't, or
Yeah.
rejection or any of that. So I can sit
Fantastic.
here and say, it's easy for me. But a lot of people
Yeah.
go through a lot of different things. So,
Yeah. You're a remarkable story. I saw that you were running within a year after your transplant. That's pretty awesome.
oh, well, actually, 3 months. Let's see, I had my transplant in September. In
Hmm.
November of the same year, I was climbing on the roof hanging Christmas lights.
Oh, jeez.
So there's a picture of me up there on the roof. It's like
Yeah,
2 months after my transplant. So yeah,
that's
I am very
extraordinary.
lucky, very blessed that I didn't have a whole lot
That's
of
I'm
complications.
really happy to hear that. That's
Yeah.
really good.
Hmm.
Yeah, my first transplant, I was immediately in rejection. Like a couple months out of the hospital, I had an acute rejection, and it seemed like I had an acute rejection every 3 to 4 months. I'd go into the hospital, they keep me for a week, they give me massive amounts of steroids. They found a couple of infections during that time, but I did good. I went back to work, and I was thrilled to be back at work. I was pretty active, but then a year and a half out, I was diagnosed with BOS, which is bronchial obstructions syndrome, which is a chronic diagnosis. It's a chronic
Yeah.
rejection, and it can go on and be steady for a while, but it's not fixable. You can't go backwards, if you're, and it's just this sort of slow decline for me. I stayed pretty healthy and in my job for another year and a half. And then overnight, like literally 1 week right after Christmas, I was hiking the hills with my family. And then by my birthday in February, I was in the hospital. I was just like, I went from the healthiest I'd ever been to being back on oxygen and really quickly declining. Like it was within a 24-hour basis,
Wow.
I declined really fast.
How is that emotionally? Like I was on oxygen once for an infection that I had, and I was
Yeah,
just devastated. Like it's
yeah,
major PTSD, and so I can't
100.
imagine like
Yeah,
somebody saying you're in rejection, you're back on
yeah,
oxygen, this is your new life. We got to start
yeah,
over. How'd that
yeah.
feel?
It was horrible. Like you said, the PTSD is definitely real. The thought of not being around for my daughter's high school graduation was unimaginable. It was devastating, and then it went hand in hand with the quick um, erosion of my body and my cognitive senses. I was on massive amounts of oxygen and painkillers, and eventually they decided they wanted to put me on ECMO because my lungs just flat out weren't working. So they did an ECMO for my lungs, and then I started having wasn't getting enough oxygen to my heart. So they put me on an ECMO for the heart as well. So I was on two concurrent ECMOs, one in my neck for my lungs, one in my side for my heart.
Wow.
And I was at that point they put me in a coma, a drug-induced coma, and I was in a coma for almost 2 months
Wow.
on ECMO, waiting for new lungs, and they weren't even sure if I'd be healthy enough to get new lungs. And then my my surgeon, actually, I talked to after my surgery, says I'm the only person he's ever heard of ever of surviving two ECMOs and a lung transplant. So I was really lucky to be able to
Wow.
come out. ECMOs just are they wreak havoc on your body. It's a bridge to another thing. It's doing the work for your lungs and your heart for you, but meanwhile your body is in stasis.
Yeah.
Um, and I can also say being in a coma is one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced. When they induced the coma, I thought I would just go to sleep and wake up, but no, I lived lifetimes inside the coma. I
Really?
did crazy things. Every dream after dream after nightmare, I liberated Nazis, or I uncovered Nazis and went on these
Wow.
epic journeys, but I was always stuck somewhere because I couldn't walk. And it was really nice to wake up, not only to have a new set of lungs and be able to breathe, but to have those nightmares end.
Wow.
Um,
I've never heard of that before. I
yeah,
guess I assumed you're in a coma, you're just out.
yeah. No, I did. I had like 3 day visions that went on and on and on, and it was hard when I woke up. I don't know if I'm digressing too much from your topic, but
No,
when
you're
I
good.
woke up, it was hard to differentiate real life with my visions.
Yeah.
So several times I would talk to my wife thinking something had happened that hadn't happened. So in one of my dreams, I thought my daughter, who's a perfect kid, perfect, was dealing guns out of my garage, Glocks specifically, and she got super rebellious. So when I woke up from my coma, I'm asking my wife, "Hey, how's Shay doing? Like what's going on?" She's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
she's great. She's doing good in school, blah blah blah." And I'm like, finally, I'm just like, "What about the guns?" And my wife's like, "What? What are you talking about?"
Oh my
So
gosh.
some of it was funny and some of it's terrifying.
Wow, that's so interesting that that
Yeah,
happened. Yeah,
yeah.
I have never heard of that. Wow,
Did
you
you
should.
experience ICU delirium at all after your transplant?
No, I didn't. And in fact, I was just talking about this the other night. I really wanted to. Everybody's
Mhm.
talking about these hallucinations you could get, and I'm
Yeah,
like I didn't want to have bad hallucinations. Like
yeah,
I wanted to have some good stuff, but I really
yeah,
wanted to experience those, and I kept waiting for them, and
yeah.
nothing.
Well, you're probably fortunate you don't because they
Yeah,
aren't all pleasant. Some of them are funny, but they're usually unpleasant.
yeah, that's what I've heard.
Um,
That's what I've heard
I,
since. So I'm like, well,
I
maybe it's a
would,
good thing I didn't have them.
yeah. I wish that the doctors were gave you more information about the possibility of that happening, and also worked that as much as I love my transplant team, they acted like I was crazy. And I'm like, then I talked to other patients who have gone through the same thing as me, and they're like, oh, no, no, I felt, we had the same hallucinations. We went through the same experience. So it's kind of hard to be in delirium and then have people not believe you or dismiss it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, the doctors especially, because they should know
Yeah.
that this stuff
Yeah.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
So wow. Okay. So you woke up from your coma. Did you already
Yeah.
have a second transplant after?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I woke up, um,
Did you know
had,
that you were going to need another one before they put you into the coma?
yes, I
Okay.
knew that. Well, I didn't know I was going to get one though. I
Right.
definitely needed one. My doctor said my lungs were like bricks.
Oh
So
wow.
I knew I needed one. I didn't know how long I'd be in a coma. I thought it was a couple days, but it went on and on and on. And I didn't know if they would find lungs. So when I came out of my coma, they told me I had new lungs. I also thought they told me that I had a new heart, but that was part of my delirium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The hardest part about the second one was I'd been in a coma for so long, the degradation of my body and
Yeah.
my cognitive health. I couldn't talk. I couldn't form sentences. I couldn't hold a pen. I couldn't communicate. And more devastatingly, I couldn't walk.
Yeah.
And that was horrible. And I didn't know if I would be able to walk. I had suffered a ton of neuropathy in my feet, and I'm still don't get great feedback from my feet. I could walk and now, and look normal, but the day I took my first step was I realized, oh man, this is hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. That first step is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And then the next 10 steps were equally as hard.
Yeah.
And it took me about a month and a half to actually learn to walk again. I graduated from a wheelchair to a walker to a cane, and now, um, don't have to use any implements now. And I went on a 3 mile hike the day before yesterday. So
That's
can't run
amazing.
yet.
Yeah.
Running's out of my skill set right now, but walking definitely is, and swimming. So
Yeah. Well, that's amazing that you've come this far. So
yeah,
yeah. Wow. Okay. So um yeah, I was gonna actually ask you about your body because
yeah,
just I would and again I was talking about it the other night. I woke up from my transplant and it was the next day, and they took me to the ICU, and that next day they took me out for walking, and I couldn't believe
yeah,
how weak my legs were just from being 2 days,
yeah,
2 days.
yeah,
And so 2 months, I can't
yeah,
imagine.
yeah.
You know,
My legs were sticks, my arms were sticks. My hair fell out. All sorts of things. I'm still, dealing with some of the fallout of that being, stationary for so long. And I'm dealing with it. I'm doing physical therapy. I'm working out, but it's a slow road back. So
yeah. Wow.
the other thing I did was I worked with a speech therapist because, oftentimes after extended comas, people have cognitive decline,
Yeah.
and speech therapists just don't work on your speech; they work on your cognitive abilities through playing games, through doing. She would cut out the crossword, New York Times crossword for me every day. My wife would play games. My daughter can play games, do word puzzles and things like that. I eventually got to a point where now I have no cognitive dysfunction except for I do like to replace names of objects with other names of objects, and it's
Hmm.
hard for me to undo that. Like my wife and I play, we play cribbage every day, but I call it backgammon, and it's really hard for me not to call it backgammon, and I do that all the time.
I do that anyway.
Yeah, part of it might
um,
just be getting old too.
well, could be because I've been
Yeah,
doing that for a couple years now,
yeah,
and so sometimes it's hard to, it's hard to determine whether it's
yeah,
transplant related or just aging. Because I
yeah.
remember I was 40. It was like a year after my transplant, and I went to the doctor. I was having problems with my eyesight, and
Mm.
I told them about it, and they're like, "Well, you're in your 40s. That's what happens." I was like, "You shut your mouth. That's not true. It's transplant related."
Oh, it's so true though. I really remember I had perfect vision when I was 44, no 43, and then the day I woke up on my 44th birthday, I couldn't see. I had needed glasses. Like it was
Yeah,
overnight. It
yeah,
was
it happened
crazy.
to me too. I know.
Yeah. So you were 39 when you had your transplant.
Yeah.
How did I mean? ho- I was 50, and I was already feeling age, but I mean 39 is really young,
Yeah.
and I know that CF patients often need transplants at a younger age. How long did you know that you were going to need a transplant? Like what age? And
So I was probably so when you have CF, you pretty much know you're going to need a transplant at
yeah,
some point. But when I started
yeah.
declining pretty good, I think I was 37.
Yeah.
It was just a couple years before, and then
Oh,
that's when we started talking about it. And then I
yeah,
started the evaluation process, and that took
yeah,
forever to find the right
yeah,
hospital and stuff. So
yeah,
actually, funny thing about that is when I was talking to the doctor, my my pre-transplant team, we were talking about transplants, and I was sick at the time, so I was having an exacerbation, so my lung function was always lower when I was sick.
yeah,
And so I don't remember the full conversation, but I remember the doctor saying, well, you're already close to 40. So it's probably time for a transplant. And I just kept thinking
yeah.
like, wow, like you just called me old. Like, yeah, like,
Yikes.
they're like, well, you're already, up there in age, so you might as well get the
Yeah.
transplant now. So,
Have you encountered? He's on the same group, Facebook group. His name's Dylan Mortimer. He's a
mm-mm.
CF patient, and he just had hit, or he's had two transplants as well,
Oh, really?
and he's
Yeah.
an artist. Check him out. I think I'll actually recommend. I'll talk to him and see if he'll contact you. He's a brilliant artist, and all of his art is about the experience of the transplant journey.
Oh,
And a lot of transplant centers are buying his pieces and displaying them. He does extremely well. They're beautiful pieces. They're evocative. They're surreal. And it's all about the process. And I live in California. He lives in LA. So I have gone down to visit his studio. I'm going back down to perhaps acquire one of his pieces. But they're really cool stuff.
oh, awesome. Yeah, I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah,
Definitely
yeah.
have him reach out to me. That would be
He
awesome.
he does a lot of work with CF outreach and things like that too. Because
Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah, I think he's about 40 when he had his first transplant. I think he's the same age as you.
Oh, yeah. So I haven't heard of him. So, well, I
Yeah,
might have. I usually don't look at the names when I read this
yeah,
Facebook. I just see the
yeah,
post. And then,
yeah. He posts a lot. He posts his art a lot, so maybe you'll see it. And if not, I'll have him get a hold of you.
okay, cool.
Yeah, he's fascinating.
Yeah. So, okay. So you got your second transplant, you're recovering, you're trying to get your strength back. And you said that took about a month and a half.
Took about a month and a half to even walk. So
Oh,
I was in physical rehab for maybe close to a month, and then checked out and was able to because I lived so far away. I wasn't able to come home. So my wife and I rented out an apartment in Palo Alto near their campus,
mhm.
and I did physical therapy at home, walking up and down stairs, learning how to use a walker, using and then crutches and a cane. So it was a lot. It was probably a full year where I felt like I was physically back to where I had been before,
Were you
except
s-
for my feet. I'm not
yeah.
running, so yeah.
Were you surprised how much different the second transplant recovery was than the first?
Yeah, I had
Yeah.
it like my first one was easy. I was out of ICU in like 3 days. I was out of the hospital in 10 days, 11 days, and I went home after a month.
Yeah.
So it was a much more expedited process.
Yeah.
And yeah, this time, not because of my lungs, it was because of what happened to my body while on ECMO. It just graded so far that it's little stupid things like you know um, you don't brush your teeth for 2 months when you are in a coma and have a feeding tube. So I've had to do a lot of dental surgery and work around that. My hair
Yeah.
fell out. It's finally grown back, which is unfortunate, but just yeah. And then dealing, I don't know if you still experience pain, but I have a lot of neuropathy in both my legs and in my chest where the incision was,
Okay.
because having two transplants really difficult because there's so much scar tissue.
Yeah.
And so and then I don't know if you did the clamshell or not, but
I did. Yeah.
essentially I wired together, and because of some of the drugs I'm taking, specifically prednisone, it's not growing back. So I essentially the bone's not growing back. So I essentially have bone rubbing up against bone held together by wire.
Eeh.
So
Ouch.
I have
Yeah.
pretty much 24/7 pain in
Yeah.
regards to that. And learning to live with that has been a challenge, but doing it, it's like pain becomes like a friend or a relationship you have.
Yeah.
um, you have to make your peace with it. So,
Yeah.
have you experienced post-operative pain, or
I haven't. No.
that's good?
I'm very
Wouldn't wish it
lucky.
on anybody. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't really have a whole lot of pain after, I had so much pain medicine, and then by the time I went home,
Yeah,
I didn't really have any pain. So, and I
yeah,
still
good.
hear about people like years after they still have some pain or some
Yeah,
uncomfortable feeling with the incision. And
yeah.
so I just count
I'm
my
pretty,
blessings every day because I don't have that.
I'm pretty good at predicting the weather with my chest. Um, like when changes
Yeah.
are coming, my chest really starts to
Really?
seize
Wow.
up and get tight. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, storm's coming. And it's always pretty accurate.
Wow. Wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty. That's like, the older people with the arthritis,
Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
my knee's hurting today. It's gonna rain.
Storms are coming.
Okay. So now you're back. Were you able to go back to work after you recovered?
I went back to work after my first transplant. My job was super intense. And I think it was a mistake because the intensity of the job caused a lot of stress. And I think that's one of the reasons I did have some rejection. So I decided this
Mm,
time I'm done.
yeah.
I'm done. I'm gonna. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't go back to the intensity of that job. I was declared disabled by the state, so I
Yeah.
draw a disability check, and that
Okay.
helps. Um, the other thing I did was I've always been a lifelong music fan and guitar player,
Okay.
and as part of my first transplant, playing guitar was a part of my recovery process. So with my second transplant, I bought a guitar, and I couldn't play anymore. Didn't remember how to play chords. Didn't know, I couldn't form the chord shapes. It was just devastating. And I thought, oh God, this is one of my favorite things to do. So I slowly just taught myself how to play guitar again and got better and better. And then what they talk about too is like a purpose-driven life. Post transplant, you live longer. So my
Yeah.
purpose before was work, but I didn't have that purpose anymore. So music became that purpose. And then I decided I was going to learn a song every day for a year. So I
Okay.
started this project. I shared it with friends on Facebook. Every day I'd pick up my guitar and learn a new song that I hadn't known before. And it was challenging, but I got better and better at it. And then I got better and better at being a guitar player.
Hmm.
And then someone from the Fretboard Journal found out about that I was doing that, and he did a podcast with me. So people have been sending me songs to learn and to play. And it's been a really fascinating process. My brother plays guitar and my dad plays guitar, so we get to play together and stuff like that. So it's been
It's really cool.
really, it's kind of what I do.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Do you have like a YouTube channel or something that you post these videos on, or Facebook or
No,
something?
the people that suffer through my playing and the songs are my family. I'm a horrible singer, and I think if I could sing well, I would post the videos, but I'm terrible, but I still sing anyways. Like I
Oh
sing,
yeah.
I've just felt things around. I've been walking around the house all day with my guitar, singing songs, and my family is the one who has to endure it. But my brother and I are starting to play together, and I think we'll start posting. My brother's a gifted guitar player, so I think we're going to start playing out and playing some shows,
Okay.
and
Very cool.
maybe make some videos with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see.
Yeah,
So when you start getting them out there, then you're gonna have to let me know so I can
yeah.
endure that as well.
I mean, you have it too. You have this podcast.
Yeah,
I think that I can imagine that this gives you a lot of purpose,
it does.
and you're covering something that not many other people cover or talk about. I think it's really powerful, and I'm glad you do this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, when you
Yeah,
were talking about that purpose, what is it? Purpose driven.
purpose-driven life.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought about my podcast and my
yeah,
foundation, and that's
yeah.
mine. I'm trying to work too, but this is what I do. This is what I love.
Great,
So
great.
yeah,
Um, yeah, my wife and I do advocacy work for Donor Network West. I speak at hospitals and things like that.
that's
And my
awesome.
wife is trained to be a mentor for people that are going through the transplant process
Oh,
at
fantastic.
Stanford. And it's hard. It's a hard job for her. She's just right now has been mentoring with a woman whose husband was got a transplant about around the same time as I did, and he never left the hospital and died about 4 or 5 months ago.
Wow,
And
that's
she's
so hard.
grieving, and
Yeah,
so my wife's really close to her and
yeah,
helping her through the process. Not everybody survives transplant,
yeah,
and it's a difficult part of the journey. I think is
yeah,
knowing people that it's weird to go back to clinic. And first when you're in clinic, you know everybody, you're high fiving, you're telling stories, and then as you go back, less and less people that you remembered are there, and then there's a whole new batch of new transplants.
yeah. And
Did
it's
you
hard.
know?
Oh, God, sorry.
Oh, did you know? I mean, when you first are told about transplant process, you're also told that the average mortality rate, what is it, 50% at 5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, and how'd you feel about learning that?
When they told me that, I was so overwhelmed by that.
Yeah,
I was like thinking, well, I'm only going to have 5 more years left.
mhm,
And then I also heard that it's even lower in the first year.
yeah,
And, but by the time I ended up, by the time I got my transplant, I was in so many Facebook support groups learning
yeah,
about all these people who are living in their, 20th year, 30th year. So it's
yeah,
like, well, those are just statistics. And also
yeah,
they take those statistics with people who die within the first year, and it doesn't necessarily mean they die from transplant. It's
yeah,
just if you had a transplant and you happen to die
yeah,
for whatever reason, it goes into
yeah,
that category. So I hate it that they tell people that. I think it scares people,
yeah,
but somebody said that, they have to, they have to tell you, but I don't think they
yeah.
do. I think they should say statistically it's 5 years, but there's a lot of people who live past 5 years.
Yes, yeah. It's not a 5-year death sentence. It's and it also skewed too because a lot of people that get transplants are quite a bit older,
Right.
and I probably skew it the other, that way because I was older when I got my transplant, and I might did suffer rejection.
Yeah.
So I didn't even make it 3 years. So, but yeah, I have several friends, people I know that I met through the Facebook groups, that are living long, long lives. I was when I came out. So after my second transplant, I felt very mortal because I was like, okay, if these lungs only last 3 years, they're not going to give me a third transplant. So I started working with a therapist that was really specialized in end of life therapy and dealing with what it is to be mortal. I've done a lot of reading about it, and worked through a lot of those feelings. And then one day I was heading off to see my counselor or my therapist, and I had this really weird feeling. And I walk in, I said, I just got really scared. And she said, why? I said, what if I live for a long time? I don't know what I'm going to do. I've lived with this axe hanging over my head so long, and my new lungs are far healthier than my last set of lungs. and I haven't had rejection. And suddenly I'm thinking, oh man, I might be around for a little while. This is kind of a new thing to deal with, a new wrinkle to this.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to kind of think the same way, before my transplant when I was younger in my 20s.
Hmm.
I remember being in a class in college. I can't even remember what class it was for, but they were talking about retirement, planning for your retirement and starting early in your 20s. That way, when you retire,
Yeah,
you have a good, retirement. And I remember thinking, well, I have cystic fibrosis. I'm not going to live to retirement
yeah,
age. So why should I bother? And now that I've had a transplant and I see these people living to, 30 years out from transplant, I'm
yeah,
like, well, shoot, maybe I should
yeah.
have been planning for my retirement. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
have a really soft spot for CF patients. I can't imagine what it would be like knowing for most of your life that this was inevitable. I mean,
yeah,
for me, it came quickly. It happened overnight. It was unbelievable. But to be young and to have that diagnosis, knowing it's inevitable, and um, yeah, I can't imagine what that's like. So I do have a lot of friends that are CF patients, that I've met through the clinic and things like that, and it's a different it's different than what I went through.
I think for me, and I don't know if this is for everybody, but
Yeah,
for me, I I knew about transplant. I knew eventually I might have one. I didn't think I would ever be in this position. And I didn't know the extent of lung
yeah,
transplant.
yeah,
So it would have been worse if I would have known, actually. If
yeah,
I would have known all this stuff, I would have dwelled on it more. I'm glad I didn't know because
yeah,
I just didn't. I just lived my life. I was like, well, I have
yeah,
CF, I'm just going to live until I can't anymore. And
yeah,
so I don't know how I would feel if I knew about everything. And I think a lot of
yeah,
CF young people don't really know
yeah,
because they, not that they don't care, but they're just young. They
yeah,
don't, that's not on their mind.
yeah.
I'm assuming. I don't really know. I can only speak for myself.
Would you do another transplant if you did get sick again?
Absolutely 100%.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know. I assume that everybody says yes to that. Now, I didn't
Yeah.
have a heart transplant, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But even I think even if I did have a hard one, I got to live longer.
Yeah.
And so I want to live as long as I can.
Yeah.
So,
I know people that don't get the second transplant. I've met them.
oh, really?
They tend to have more difficult experiences or really negative reactions to the drugs. I met a CF guy, who was on his third transplant, and he wasn't going to do the fourth.
Okay.
And he was young. He was very young. And then I asked my friend Dylan, the artist, like, he's had two. Would you do a third? And he's just like, I don't know, man. And I think myself, like, I don't think a third is available to me because of my age. I also think ethically, I don't know if I could accept a third pair of lungs. But I think it's contingent on where you're at with your family, where you're at with your family and friends, and
Do you mind
um,
elaborating on that a little bit more about ethically you wouldn't be able to? I mean, if you don't want to, it's okay, but
oh no, of
I'm
course I
curious.
will. There's a lot of people like us have sort of a survivor's guilt. I mean, so, the reality of lung transplant is someone had to die, some family had to lose their child in order for you to get lungs, and to have done that twice, it's like, oh God, like, two people have died and given me their lungs, and it's kind of, sometimes it's hard. You think, am I a good enough person? Do I deserve this? Am I living my life the fullest? Am I, sucking the marrow out of the bone of life? Because if you're not, you feel guilty. You feel like, I'm wasting this opportunity. I felt incredibly guilty about, becoming sick after my first transplant. Through nothing I could do. I did the drug regimen. I wore my mask. I avoided, all the things that could get you sick again, and it still did. It was just inevitable rejection. So I felt like I'd failed at something. So I don't know if I could carry the thought of another person having sacrificed, and that maybe someone is deserves it more than I, or someone deserves their first transplant and I don't deserve my third. Also, my second one was so difficult, and I'm not saying all second ones are difficult. My friend Dylan went through second, and he went through like a breeze. It was just difficult for me. I don't know if I could go through that experience again.
Yeah.
But it also depends on, I mean, I have a daughter who just started college, and I'm living. I love experiencing college again through her eyes, and I want to see every minute of it. So, I want to see her get married. I want to see her have kids. So maybe that will take precedent. That I've already proven that I'm strong enough to survive two. Maybe I can prove that I'm strong enough to survive three. But
Yeah.
I hope I don't. If I do have to do it again, I don't want to be in a coma.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Understand. That's understandable.
yeah,
Are you worried that, you know, or do you think that, come year three around March 24th, you're going to be worried
yeah,
that you're going to need
yeah.
another one?
I was diagnosed with BOS in October, a year and a half after my first, and October just left us, and I'm still healthy. I'm still breathing. I've had no rejection, so I'm very hopeful.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you having gone through it before, there's definitely deadlines or dates that pass that you think, okay, here's where I was last year at this time, so, or, 2 years ago at this time. So there's definitely some, post traumatic stress, PTSD around those anniversaries and dates. But, I'm very hopeful, that I don't have to make that decision or face that rejection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I would be nervous too.
Yeah.
Especially like, so I'm 4 years out. And if I went into rejection and needed another one, whatever time period that would be, I would be
Yeah.
nervous up until then. And
Yeah.
so I don't know. I guess I would see it as like another conquer that I have to get
Yeah. Another.
past. I have to get past year three or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think for it, every year's a gift. Every day is a gift.
yeah,
But like the count down the years, and I think like the next big one for me after 3 years would be 5 years. I beat the odds.
right.
I survived that 5 years, and then just keep counting the days because every day is a gift, and every day is profound, especially when you face death in the eye and been as close to it as we have. Life becomes a lot more profound and a lot more worth living. Doesn't mean that there's not fear, though.
Yeah. And I think that the whole 5 year statistic, I think for a lot of people, like anybody who's had a transplant and they have that 5 year, I don't know if it's different for different organs, probably.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, coming up to that 5 years, they get like, I'm a little nervous because I'm on
yeah,
year four, I'm getting to five. And so
yeah,
I'm kind of, paying attention to things. And,
yeah,
and I had a friend who I was a personal trainer. So I was training her and she was going through a lot of anxiety because she was coming up on 5 years. And so I think a lot of transplant recipients get nervous around that
yeah,
time because that's what the
yeah,
doctors tell you, well, you got
yeah.
5 years. So gotta make the most
Yeah,
of this last year.
they
So
need to do a better job explaining what that means.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
But it's also, like it's nice to know that you've gotten that 5 years. It's like
Absolutely.
not you, we, or the 2 weeks or anything. It's just gotta live. I just feel like you have to live appreciating every day for what it is,
Yes.
and and worry less.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. I agree with that. Like I say, you just got to go live your best life.
yeah,
You're alive now, so
yeah,
live now. Don't focus
yeah,
on
yeah,
what's going to happen. When it happens, it
yeah,
happens. Until then, enjoy your time.
yeah. I
Yeah.
just like deleted a bunch of apps because I'm addicted to my phone like everyone else is, and I get myself doom scrolling on TikTok, and I'm like, this is not using my life to its fullest. So I deleted TikTok. I deleted a couple hours. I'm still on Facebook. I see Facebook as a positive thing because I do meet people like you. I communicate a lot in a couple different lung transplant groups. I met my friend Dylan in there. I didn't discover the Facebook group until after my second transplant.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I was in the hospital and I discovered I'm like, wait, there's all these people that I can talk to and have
Yeah.
been through this and been through the same experience of having ICU delirium and being on ECMO and all that. I really wish I'd had that support after my first transplant.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah,
It's really
being
helpful.
part of the community now, I felt really isolated the first time. But this time I feel like I'm more of a part of the community. I've met you, I've met Dylan, I've met people in my area that have had or pre or post transplant, and I do a lot of advocacy, and it's much a healthier way to live, um,
Yeah.
acknowledging it.
Yeah. I think so too.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, so now you're hiking and doing fantastic. You're feeling great.
yeah,
And so that's amazing. That's so wonderful that you've
yeah,
come out of this. And you went through a lot on your second transplant, a
yeah,
lot. And
yeah.
it takes a lot of courage. And I think that you have a lot of courage. So that's amazing.
Thank you.
So I do have one more question, but I just
Sure.
want to make sure that you've had the opportunity to say everything that you wanted to say.
Um, I guess I asked Dylan this too, and I would like to ask your opinion on it. A lot of the memes around surviving transplant and lungs is we're warriors and we're all this. And I keep saying to my wife, like, I'm not a warrior. I just lived. I survived. I don't feel like, I mean, what we've been through is extraordinary, but I still feel like I don't feel like a warrior, and I don't know if other people feel that way at all. I just kind of feel like something bad happened to me, and I survived it, and now I'm coping as best as I can. But maybe that's what a warrior does. I don't know.
Never really thought about it. I
Yeah,
could see where you're coming from because you kind of just did what you had to do to
yeah,
survive. I think people see it as warriors, like when somebody who hasn't been through it calls you a warrior, they think of you as a warrior because they
yeah,
can't imagine themselves going
yeah,
through this hard traumatic time. So I think you probably see yourself more as a survivor
yeah,
than a warrior. I mean, I think everybody's a warrior in their own way. Like we're all
yeah,
surviving life, right?
yeah,
And so some of
yeah.
us just have to go
These days.
through harder times than others.
Yeah, yeah,
So, yeah, I guess, do I see myself as a warrior? Yeah, I do. Maybe not necessarily because I had a transplant and I had, CF my whole life, but just because I'm still alive and I'm
yeah.
making it every day. So
I see
that's my
that.
take
Yeah.
on it. Yeah.
Plus, you're working hard to create a community and tell people stories, and I think that's pretty amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I do. Well, I don't work hard. I just do it because I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah,
But I am doing it. That's what I'm
yeah.
trying to do. So yeah,
And one last thing, I just think um, people that don't know about transplant don't see the illness. Like we have an invisible condition. People
yeah,
don't see who you are, and it's a strange experience, because I do feel like different. Right now I do feel somewhat disabled because of my feet and my pain. But to everyone else, we look healthy and happy and all that. And it's kind of a disconnect sometimes that I think people who are pre-transplant need to maybe think about or be prepared for, to have that experience.
yeah.
Because it wasn't something I expected.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's especially with a lot of, well, I was going to say it with a lot of lung diseases, it's invisible. It is until it's
Yeah.
not, until you're on
Until you're
oxygen. And
wearing oxygen. And
for
yeah.
me, my whole life, I have been a complete open book. Everybody knew
Yeah.
I had CF. Everybody knew when I was sick. Everybody
Yeah.
knew I needed a transplant. Everybody knew like I'm an oversharer all the
Okay.
time. I tell people I overshare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so if you don't share with people what you're going through, then they're just going to see what they see. And a
Yeah.
lot of times it's invisible. So it's hard when people don't realize what you're going through because you
Yeah.
don't you don't share with them. So if you want people to understand you have to make them understand because they just don't know. They're not educated. So
I like that attitude and that perspective, because I do think I hide it too much.
yeah,
I mean, I'm open with my family and my friends and all that, but I guess I do advocacy work too, so I'm open in that way too. But I don't know. It's just sometimes I feel tucked away and hidden. So,
yeah.
but
And I can see how that happens because
yeah,
some people don't really want to share their entire life. They
yeah,
don't want to share everything. But
yeah.
for me, I'm just like, you know, I'll tell you
Well,
what I had for breakfast,
it's one of the reasons I reached out to you, because I saw that your podcast and I listened to quite a few episodes, and I just thought, like, would I be interesting? Is my story interesting here? And I think it's relevant. So
So yes, your story is I feel like every transplant story is
yeah,
interesting because
yeah,
it's their story.
yeah,
So, I mean, some interviews are shorter than others. There's not a whole lot to share.
yeah,
And some, have to break it up into 2 episodes. But every transplant story is interesting because it's
yeah.
your story. It's your own journey. And everybody's journey is different, but it's the same.
Well, good.
So,
Well, thanks for letting me share mine. Thank you.
oh, you are so welcome. I'm glad that you came on to share it.
Yeah,
I think we talked about a lot of great things. I do
yeah.
want to ask you that I ask everybody, and the question is, if you had a piece of advice that you would give to somebody that that you wish you knew before your transplant, what would that be? And it could
That's probably
be before the first one or the second.
so someone who is going to get it. It
Yeah.
looks like they get a transplant.
Hmm.
Probably the hardest question anyone's ever asked me.
It is a hard question.
um, I mean, my first one is like, don't be afraid, but it is fearful. It is scary.
Hmm.
Um, Definitely would warn people about ICU delirium, and that it's not abnormal. That you're not broken, you're not crazy. This is the experience. I would definitely here. Of course, I'm answering different questions. I would definitely warn about the 5-year thing. That it's not a 5-year death sentence. This is a 5-year average, and many people live far, far, far past that. Yeah. Oh, and I would tell everyone, be a goddamn organ donor.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I do the advocacy work, because it's just when I meet people that aren't organ donors, I'm just like, are you kidding me? So yeah, check that box when you get your license.
Absolutely. 100%. Very
Yeah,
good. Okay, Todd. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your
it
story.
was.
I
Thanks
think,
for the opportunity.
oh, you're welcome. I think you have a great story. And I just admire all the strength and courage that you've had. So congratulations.
Likewise.
And I hope that you live another 30 years like the rest of us.
I'm hoping that's the case.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Well, thanks again for coming on. It was so nice to talk to you, and I'll talk to you
Nice to
soon.
meet you, Jenny.
Stay
Take
healthy.
care.
Thank you for listening to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook. Oh, and if you have not signed up to be an organ donor, please visit www.organdonor.gov and register today. You too can save lives.